He's the director of training at the Chicago Institute. He's a marathoner, an Ironman, ultra marathoner. He's written a book, a recently published book, My Journey to Ironman, Endurance Sports as a Means of Individuation. And we're happy to have him today. Our protocols, as Lisa Pounders, my co-host, will be letting us know several times during the meeting, is to stay muted until the Q&A. The format today will be, we'll take a break at about an hour, another break at the end of the second hour. I think Warren has something special for just before each of those breaks. Those breaks will be 5 to 7 minutes or so for the bathroom. And there'll be about 20 minutes or so left at the end for discussion and Q&A. And during that time, you can either go to the, down at the bottom of your screen, the emoticons. What's the name of that, Lisa?
On mine, it's reactions.
Okay, reactions. And then there's a place where you can raise your hand. And then when you raise your hand, it goes in a queue and we'll call on you. So please remain muted until you're called on, because otherwise the sound is really not good for on these Zoom things if people aren't muted. Or you can actually text your question into the chat and Lisa or I will read the question to Warren. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Warren Sibilla. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning. Start the program here. Okay, wonderful. Yes. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be an especially personal and especially intimate look at the transcendent function. So I would really encourage you to take as few notes, if any, as possible. I believe you'll have access to the recording afterward if you want to look back at it, but instead to really sit still, still your mind and allow yourself to immerse into the experience. Rich has given us our format, so I will just dive right in. At the end of the Transcendent Function essay, Jung makes this provocative statement, audiatur et altera pars. Audiatur et altera pars. The Latin for let the other side be heard. The whole of analytical psychology rests on this notion, letting the other side be heard. After Jung's wrestle in the black books, later in the red books, he says, I had to make a confession in stone. Bollingen. And of course, we're all familiar with the notion of confession as acknowledging, admitting a wrongdoing and making it right. But a closer look at confession, the etymology, also includes acknowledging, declaring, making a vow, and then disclosing. Jung says, helplessness and weakness are the eternal experience and the eternal problem of mankind. To do this, to this problem, there's also an eternal answer. Otherwise, it would have been all up with humanity long ago. When you have done everything that could possibly be done, the only thing that remains is what you could still do if only you knew it. And I'll highlight just a few things about this particular quote. One, he says, the eternal experience of humankind, the eternal problem, that has an eternal answer. Okay, and obviously he uses the word eternal 3 times, obviously important. And eternal, to be without beginning and without end. The eternity. Again, the whole of analytical psychology, letting the other side be heard, relating and having a relationship with eternity. The symbol is the best possible expression for what is as yet not understood. Okay. The classic example, of course, is person wakes up, remembers a dream, and immediately says, oh, I know what that means. Or worse, oh, what a silly image, and dismisses it out of hand. Symbolum, thrown together, but not thrown together haphazardly, thrown together with an incredible genius. If we can have the patience to stay with the symbol, the best possible expression for what you do not yet understand. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. Okay, now I'm going to begin this story with my experiences at Mission San Antonio de Padua in Jung, California. Some of you may be familiar with the missions. Spanish came up from Mexico along the California and set up these missions, these small communities. Mission San Antonio is the second one. Was established in 1771. It's one of those very, very sacred, very magical places. The first courses that I took in graduate school were, and I hesitate to use the word taught because they weren't taught as much as they were facilitated at the mission here. And they were facilitated as silent retreats, typically 4 days. My graduate work was in Fresno, which is, I think, about an hour and a half, maybe hour and 50 minutes from the mission. And of course, this is before cell phones and internet and so forth. But nonetheless, we were not permitted to bring any so-called modern conveniences, which included, for example, a wristwatch. We could bring art supplies. We could bring only the books for the course if we chose to. If we didn't, that was fine. But you could bring nothing else. And all of our comings and goings were announced by way of the mission bell. For example, meeting in class or mealtime, that type of thing. And so you can imagine it left many, many, many hours for quiet contemplation. Jung says, individuation is closely connected to the transcendent function, since this function creates individual lines of development, which could never be reached by keeping to the path prescribed by collective norms. Of the dream, it can indeed be said that the stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner, as a harbinger of fate, a portent and comforter, a messenger of the gods. Now, this is Rosario, one of two cats at the mission. I mentioned that it's a sacred, special place. I can only give a few examples. One, there was, and the mission is has a Catholic church. It's part of the diocese in the area, and there was a death with one of the parishioners who was a soldier overseas in the Middle East, and they held a funeral at the church, and Rosario came in, took stock of what was happening, went back into the sacristy and grabbed a rosary, came out and laid on the grieving mother's lap, dropped the rosary, left the rosary with her, and then went and climbed up on top of the casket. Just many, many magical moments. While I was at the mission, my first time, which was a course on dreams, I had this dream. I'm in an ancient burial ground where the bodies have all risen to life and are dancing and celebrating in grand fashion. It's sometime in the middle of the night, but the sky is as bright as it could possibly be with stars. In front of me, I see all sorts of natives dancing and singing and celebrating life in a worshipful manner. To my left, at the opening of the burial grounds, I see 3 bishops, all dressed in their pink vestments, the third Sunday in Advent. Hands folded in prayer, heads held low in reverence to the woman in front of them, who's wearing a black hooded vestment so that I can't see her face. In front of her is a canvas, and she is painting the entire scene. Beautiful colors, all against an overlay of the conjunction of the sun and the moon, which she is also somehow painting. I'm in awe and eventually say to her, "You sure have your men in line." No one moves, and the solemnity and celebration continues unabated. Well, you can imagine the energy of the dream. And of course, we're having a course on dreams, and in the evening session, we were invited to, no matter the topic of the course, to bring dreams, write them out, put them on a table without our names on them, and the professor would maybe pull out a few and talk about them. The first course that I took there, I had the dream. I didn't have the courage to to bring it in. The second one I did. The second course I took there, I did. And he, sure enough, pulled out the dream and indicated that he wasn't going to make a lot of comments about the dream, except to say that the dreamer had a deep relationship with the psyche, and that a monk who was in residence at the mission had made a pilgrimage to the mission in the last couple of months and had set up a shrine to the Black Madonna, which is in a room adjacent to where we were. And that if the dreamer was so inclined, could pay a visit. So I couldn't sleep that night. So in the middle of the night, I went, and it was quite an experience. When I returned home from the mission, this is several years later, of course, my daughter asked if she could repaint her room. And I said, sure, what do you have in mind? She said, well, I want to make it all sky blue, and then I want to paint stars all over the walls. So there's an example of the mission playing out. Here's a picture of the image of the mission with the burial grounds. Jung says of the anima, something strangely meaningful clings to her, a secret knowledge or hidden wisdom. This aspect only appears to the person who gets to grips with her seriously. Only then, when this hard task has been faced, does one come to realize more and more that behind all her cruel sporting with human fate, there lies something like a hidden purpose, which seems to reflect a superior knowledge of all life's laws. Here's the entrance to the burial ground. Okay, let's take a look at the word transcendent. From the mid-14th century, including escaping from, inclusion in, to surpass, to climb over or go beyond, to get to the other side of. She who has knowledge of all life's laws. And of course, the dream brings up the question, what is life? What is death? And who is it that makes the dead to dance? Okay, now I have to tell you my money tree story, because in working with the transcendent function and its energies, it's inevitable that you get caught up in inflations. And here's an example. When I had my first apartment in Chicago, I was at the grocery store, and I rescued a money tree from the grocery store and started working with it. And it really took off, so much so that I had to repot it after only a couple of months, and it got bigger yet. And getting full of myself, I decided, well, you know, it's doing pretty well, but if I fertilize it, then it will grow even faster. So I went out and got fertilizer and started fertilizing it, and lo and behold, it stopped growing. And then not only did it stop growing, but all the leaves turned yellow and fell off. And so one night, torturing myself, I stayed up until the last leaf fell off. And then I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose now. So I took it out. I washed the roots. I threw the pot away, the soil, repotted it with fresh soil, and hoped upon hope that it would come back. Well, here's the money tree today. I don't know if you can tell, but it would probably 14 plus 16 feet high. And you can see there's new shoots regularly. It is, for those of you who may not know, it is an exceptionally finicky tree. It likes to be in a certain spot with a certain amount of light and shade, and it will do just fine. But it actually, in moving from apartment to apartment, it's lost its leaves again and then regrown them. So nice lesson for me to remember that the tree has its own rhythm, much like the psyche. Okay, now we'll look at the ox herding, some of the ox herding pictures. The ox herding pictures are from 12th century China, and they depict the way of individuation in an incredibly beautiful way, and they've become very, very important to me. Historically, there's a series of 5, there's a series of 6, there's a much less known series of 8, but the most common is a series of 10 pictures in which there's an ox herder and an ox. The ox being an analogy of the psyche, the ox herder, of course, an image of the ego or the small s self. And one thing to know when looking at the ox herding pictures is they're produced using the principle of, in English, wabi, W-A-B-I, which means nothing is superfluous. Everything is exactly as it's intended. And so with that, you're invited to immerse yourself into the image. Now here, with the first picture, the ox herder is, it's a little difficult to see here, but the ox herder is on a bridge in the middle of the forest. And the middle of the bridge, neither here nor there, betwixt and between, in the language of the blues, at the crossroads, neither east, north, west, or south. And hence is in that liminal space, the space without definition. We might say more colloquial, lost in the forest. But a few things to take note of. One, the right hand is open, ready to receive. In the left hand are the reins. In other words, the means are at hand for relating to the ox, but whether one realizes it or not. And of course, the ox herder is looking over her left shoulder, slightly bent at the knee, tentative, crouching, wondering, perhaps a bit fearful. Jung says in the Transcendent Function essay, for the unconscious is not this thing or that. It is the unknown as it immediately affects us. The unconscious is not this thing or that. It's the unknown as it immediately affects us. What I understand him to be saying there is the unconscious is not a noun. It's not fixed. It's a verb. It's the unknown as it continually affects us. The secret participation of the unconscious is everywhere present without our having to search for it. Yet search indeed we do. Okay, now, what are some of the ways, just very, very briefly, some of the ways that we get in our way in terms of relating to the unconscious? Well, certainly the persona. The aim of individuation is nothing less than to divest the self of the false wrappings of the persona on the one hand, and the suggestive power of primordial images on the other. Jung says, the mirror does not flatter. It faithfully shows whatever looks into it, namely, the face we never show to the world because we cover it with the persona, the mask of the actor. But the mirror lies behind the mask and shows the true face. In other words, individuation is going to mean, at a minimum, to reorient, to have a completely different adaptation. I should mention too, this picture is from the mission. The mission is teeming with rattlesnakes. It would be very, very unusual not to see at least a few rattlesnakes every day. It's a bit unsettling. Robert Johnson says, it's a brave and wise person who understands that he or she belongs right in the middle of a dilemma, and that the solution is not to avoid it, but to sit in the middle of the opposites and work through them. And of course, the grand or grandest opposites, heaven and earth, decide with either of these two great realities is an error. Robert says, over time, I came to appreciate that a middle place in which both realms are honored is not only the safest place, it is also the ecstatic place, the holy place. The two worlds are in fact one. Now, my opposites in this instance, I had probably 4 or 5 courses at the mission by the time I graduated. And so that was my experience of, that was my exclusive experience of Jung, was in these very quiet, contemplative, essentially retreats. And I certainly knew that I wanted to train to become an analyst. But what I ran into was that my experience at the Jung Institute in Chicago was in many ways the opposite of my experiences at the mission. And finally, after about a year and a half or so, in one committee meeting, it just became too much. And I asked for a leave of absence, which I was granted. And that was a very long ride home. Typically, it's about a 2-hour commute. Felt like much more than that. And I decided that if I was going to be true to the spirit of a leave of absence, that I was going to have to really imagine both life as an analyst as well as leaving that behind. And And I found myself more and more wanting to run. I had always been generally active and so forth, but for some reason, running was the only thing that really helped the heaviness and depression. And so I started running, and eventually it dawned on me, well, maybe I should run a marathon. I'd never done anything even remotely close, but I thought, well, I'm going to be 40. There's a Detroit Marathon right near my birthday. So maybe that's what I should be doing. So I signed up, no formal training. I didn't know, I had no idea what I was doing. I signed up and sure enough, I find myself at the starting line. Didn't know that I would let the other side be heard. Jung makes this statement in the Transcendent Function essay. It's not mysterious or metaphysical. For me, that's probably the grandest understatement in 18 volumes of his collected works. It is utterly mysterious and absolutely metaphysical, at least in my experiencing of the Transcendent Function. The night before the Detroit Marathon, I had this dream. I was out swimming with 3 other people, 2 women and 1 man, all of whom I did not know, but felt very comfortable with. We were way out in the middle of a body of water, a huge lake. Above us was beautiful blue sky, accompanied by a very warm, large yellow sun. I asked the woman, how far do you think it is over there? I pointed to a small island. She answered, that's 1/2 mile. I said in reply, well, that's perfect. I know I can do that. I was so excited and felt so full of potential. I began swimming and soon felt myself to be in a rhythm with the water, my body, my breath, and my feelings. I reached the island and began talking with the island people. They were so friendly and welcoming. I explained that I had just swum from over there to here. A woman then said to me while pointing toward the water, the key is to always use your breath as your guide. Breathe deeply and purposely. Doesn't have the second half. Oh, yes. Okay. Now, second half of the dream. I'm with an older woman, and we were way out in the water. So far out that land was not in sight anymore. Beneath us was a sunken ship with treasure inside. I asked if she wanted to go down and explore it. She was hesitant, waiting for me and my reply. I said, well, I'm going. She replied, okay, good, I'll go with you. We went down deep into the water. Soon we arrived at the ship and went inside. I realized quickly that within the ship there was air and I could breathe fine. We began exploring and I moved my arms back and forth across the bottom of the boat's hull. I uncovered a treasure and looked at my female guide who was watching throughout the whole process. She simply smiled at me and I woke up with a very warm feeling. Okay, now that's the night before. Now, just a little bit about the Detroit Marathon. It's run the weekend prior to the Chicago Marathon. It starts in downtown. You go for about a mile or 2, and then across the Ambassador Bridge, which is getting so much attention now, then down along the river on the Canadian side, then back to Detroit through the underground tunnel, and then out to Belle Isle, around Belle Isle, and then wind our way back downtown. Now, this is the Freedom Bridge. I had no idea that's what it was called until I started doing my research in putting my thesis together, and which leads to Belle Isle. We run around Belle Isle and then back across the Freedom Bridge. So halfway around Belle Isle equals exactly the halfway point of the marathon. And I was running in a group of, I think, 4 or 5 people, and inevitably I've come to learn that, you know, about that point, people start talking about what they're going to eat, what they're going to drink after they're through with this thing. And I had no interest in eating or anything, but I told the woman that, you know, it's starting to catch up with me. I'm sore, and the woman running next to me, and I said, you know, if I had my music, I would be okay. At that time, they didn't allow music on the course, and she looked at me and she said, the key is to always use your breath as your guide. Breathe deeply and purposely. Okay. This was, I mean, the dream was enough, but this was the first, what I like to call magical moment in these long distance events that I was to experience. She used exactly the same words from the dream. And it was piercing. I lost track of time for some amount of moments and was drawn back into the dream, and then realized, okay, I'm running a marathon. And then of course wondering, now did she say that? I know she said that. Am I low on calories? Is this hallucination? No, I know she said that. I know she said that. And that filled me with the most incredible energy, which allowed me then to get to the finish line. Jung says, the inner voice is the voice of a fuller life, of a wider, more comprehensive consciousness. That's why in mythology, the birth of the hero, or the symbolic rebirth, coincides with sunrise, for the growth of personality is synonymous with an increase of self-consciousness. For the same reason, most heroes are characterized by solar attributes, and the moment of birth of their greater personality is known as illumination. Okay, now, brings us to card 2 in the Oxherding series. Notice that the Oxherder is still deep in the forest. The right hand now, instead of being waist level and open, is shielding the eyes. And shielding the eyes to begin to see the traces of the ox. And an even closer look will let us know that there are 10 prints, an image of the self and of wholeness. Although at this point, in, might say, more disguised form, but that first glimpse into the psyche. My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call, are you there? I've shaken the dust off all the lands from my feet. Okay, now we'll talk a bit about complexes. After running the marathon, I did somehow intuitively thought, well, I should probably think about triathlons, because that includes not only running, but then swimming and biking. And the first triathlon in particular that I did, at the halfway point of the swim, I got kicked really hard in my head and saw stars. And I was training solely by intuition. I didn't have any formal training plan, or and so afterward decided, well, if I'm going to do this triathlon thing, I probably should have a coach. So I got a coach, and he's turned into far, far, far more than a coach. We've been very, very good friends for going on 2 decades now. And he decided with me that probably should do some swim lessons. So Sunday afternoons, we would go to the pool and he would film me, which is a very humbling experience. You may have a certain image of how you look in the water and swimming, and then when you see it on film is something entirely different. And early on in our Sunday afternoon sessions, he said to me, hey, you don't look like you're having fun. You look like you're just surviving. And again, that was one of those very, very piercing statements. And I had that deer in the headlight look, and I started crying. And he wasn't sure what he had said. And I had to explain to him that his statement reminded me, I never learned to swim. My dad threw me off the back of a boat in the middle of Lake Huron at night and said, make your way to the boat. That's how I learned. That's how you'll learn. And so I was swimming out of a trauma complex. I was just surviving. But once he said that, once I could experience that, swimming actually became okay. I could swim for hours. I wasn't ever fast. I was efficient, but I could swim for hours. And I told him, for all of my years of analysis, he was able to get at things that typical analysis was not. And so I called him among other things, my body analyst. Of the complex, Jung says, as a rule, there's a marked unconsciousness of any complexes, and this naturally guarantees them all the more freedom of action. In such cases, their powers of assimilation become especially pronounced, since the unconscious helps the complex to assimilate even the ego. The result being a momentary and unconscious alteration of personality known as identification with the complex. Which brings us to card 3. Working with persona, working with the complexes, inevitably brings us to the ass end of the ox, namely the shadow. By shadow, I mean the negative side of the personality, the sum of all those unpleasant qualities we like to hide, together with the insufficiently developed functions and the contents of the personal unconscious. Now, I would like you to consider an analogy with me. Think of any particular vehicle. The outside can be shiny and nice and maybe even new, and maybe you've tinted the windows and so forth. But without shadow, which is to say the transmission of the vehicle, without shadow, it doesn't go anywhere, literally. It looks nice. People might ooh and ah, but nothing gets done. It doesn't go anywhere. There's no agency. There's no impetus. There's, and so owning the shadow, having a viable relationship with the shadow means nothing less than owning the autonomic nervous system, owning the engine of the body. Now, the ritual of the skunk, one of my more memorable shadow dreams. I was standing next to a skunk on a table. The skunk was on its back, splayed out, and fully awake and conscious and subservient to a ritual. The very same woman from my Isle People water dream was present and approving of the ritual. She was sitting back in a chair, watching carefully and nodding in approval. In the ritual, I was to use my hand to scoop out the guts of the skunk and eat them. As soon as I did this, the skunk transformed and became a divine or eternal child, also awake and alert, on its back and subservient to the ritual. I hesitated slightly, but after being encouraged by the woman through another head nod and the look on her face, I scooped out the guts and ate it. It was sweet, fruit-like. I awoke with a very warm feeling. Jung says, the child is born out of the womb of the unconscious, begotten out of the depths of human nature, or rather, out of living nature herself. It is a personification of vital forces quite outside the limited range of our conscious mind, of ways and possibilities of which our one-sided conscious mind knows nothing, a wholeness which embraces the very depths of nature. It represents the strongest, most ineluctable urge in every being, namely, the urge to realize itself. It is, as it were, an incarnation of the inability to do otherwise, equipped with all the powers of nature and instinct. The urge and compulsion to self-realization is a law of nature, and thus of invincible power, even though its effect at the start is insignificant and improbable. Its power is revealed in the miraculous deeds of the child hero. Now, as we wrap up this first hour, I would like for you, we'll get back together maybe 2 or 3 minutes after the hour. And in that time, what I would like you to do, if you're inclined, is to bring to mind any particular dream, a dream image, particular feeling, anything that has a particular charge to it. Could be attraction, could be repulsion, could be something in between. And make a space for that. Hold it. And as Jung invites us, however absurd if it has a language to hear that language and to, in all cases, honor the image, the symbol, the feeling, the experience. And then we'll get back together about 2 or 3 minutes after the hour. Okay, welcome back. We'll begin with card 4 of the ox herding series, Catching the Ox. Again, consistent with the principle of Wabi, nothing superfluous. The psyche appearing particularly menacing, overpowering, and certainly very, very large. Jung says, the experience of an archetype is frequently guarded as the closest personal secret because it is felt to strike into the very core of one's being. It's like a primordial experience of the non-ego, of an interior opponent who throws down a challenge to the understanding. Indeed, not even our thought can clearly grasp them because it never invented them. Now, one particular detail to note here is that a nose ring is being used, and if you know, in the Zen tradition, they will say, well, how do you manage a 2,000-pound bull? Easy, through a nose ring. Nose ring, the bull will do anything. So in some very real sense, this fight is really a non-fight. Nonetheless, at this point, it appears like a fight. And at this point in the story, my year was up of leave of absence, and I decided that I would re-engage with the Institute, but that I would do so with a very deep promise to myself that I would never lose sight of this magical experience of the archetype, magical experience of the psyche, which I had felt in these long distance endurance events. Card 5, Taming the Ox. Notice that now what appeared to be the forest being lost, now looking back over the left shoulder, the reins are being used. There's a relationship with the ox. And the ox isn't, although has not diminished in size, is certainly much more docile. The same crouching stance, except eyes fixed directly on the ox. Jung says, the birth of the divine child is the individuation process. Insofar as this process runs its course, it means nothing more than the acorn becomes an oak, the calf a cow, and the child an adult. The central symbols of this process describe the self, which is our totality. The self is the whole person, whose symbols are the divine child and its synonyms. And finally, card 6, looking at 4, 5, and 6 together. Riding the ox home. Okay, now, the ox herder is back on that very same bridge, betwixt and between, neither here nor there, but anything but lost. Instead, riding the ox, relating to the ox. No more reins needed. Remember, Jung tells us that number is the first patterning that the unconscious takes this side of the unconscious, the first glimpse that we can get of the unconscious. And music, of course, is what I like to say, putting skin on number, giving number a voice. So here the ox herder is demonstrating a viable, productive relationship with psyche. Jung says, the self cannot become conscious and real without the withdrawal of external projections. An act of introjection is needed. The realization that the self lives in you and not in an external figure, separated and different from yourself. The self has always been and will be your innermost center and periphery, your scintilla and punctum solus, the inner sun. It is even biologically the archetype of order and dynamically the source of life. Just take a moment there and highlight the withdrawal of external projections. And again, back to my analogy of the vehicle as a metaphor for the self. When you put it in gear, when you make willful choices about, I'll go here, I'll go there, I won't go here, I won't go there, I'll put it in this gear and not that gear, I can go forward, I can go in reverse, I have choices. Then you don't project onto the world what otherwise belongs to yourself. You're not waiting for the world to change in order for your life to get better. The self cannot become conscious and real without the withdrawal of those projections. So, catching the ox, taming the ox, riding the ox. If the individuation process is to be made conscious, Jung tells us, consciousness must confront the unconscious and a balance must be found. As this is not possible through logic, one is dependent on symbols, which make the irrational union of opposites possible. Okay, now, at this point, I had done many, what at that time were called half Ironmans. I'd done many triathlons, running events, and my coach and I decided that it was time to step up to Ironman. And for those of you unfamiliar with Ironman, it includes a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, followed by a traditional marathon. And you might ask, well, okay, how did you get those distances? Well, equals 140.6 miles. And originally, some athletes in Kona, Hawaii, decided, well, let's see who's the fittest among us. And to do so, we'll swim out to that island and back. We'll ride around Kona, which is 112 miles. And then we'll set up a run. Let's just make it a marathon. That's how they decided. And I want to highlight here the role of discipline in training. And just play for a moment with this word, discipline. Discipline certainly means instruction, training, knowledge, learning, and of course its root, disciple. Which begets love, being a student, being a pupil, having a teacher, the role of discipline. And I highlight that because the training was especially grueling. But first of all, I have to highlight my family, because the training is sometimes as much as 25 or more hours a week. Typically very early morning swims, if you can, doing something on your lunch hour, and then some type of evening training. And I simply could not have gotten through Ironman except for my family. Whether it was, for instance, they wouldn't typically get up with me for the early swims, but for example, on the bike rides, we would set up out and back routes where they would meet me at some particular point where I could get fresh water bottles and calories and a smile and an encouragement. On my long runs, my kids would bike next to me, and I was able to put extra calories on their bikes so that I could run further. Always, always, always their encouragement. It just simply could not be done without many, many people working on my behalf. On the right is my coach, Greg, who has been, as I said, just indispensable, whether it was knowledge of triathlon, whether it was encouragement, always, always, always at my side. Of course, my family, again, triathlon is, except for the ultra triathlon, which I'll talk about in a minute, always is at the crack of dawn. Now, I also joined a triathlon team, which was incredible. And after finishing an Ironman, one of our rituals was to write up your experience, to write up the best you could, the magic, and share it with others as a means of encouraging and motivating and holding them in their training and discipline. And this is what one of my teammates wrote. She wrote, and I would like, before I start here, I'm going to read this twice because this is also a metaphor for individuation. Ironman is a funny way to celebrate life. No one can tell you about it. You must discover it for yourself. It calls for an extreme sense of dedication and perseverance with a dashing flair of humor. Always the spectators, family, friends, and volunteers are the heroes of the day. The whole event The whole event is made up of free souls escaping from the ordinary social conventions and rising above mediocrity. What you gain from training and towing the line is good and is never truly lost. It stays a part of a person, becomes part of their character. Do not try to analyze it. Just have faith that everything changes color when you experience your own little miracles of the day. I often have this in my pocket when I trained. But here I want to also read it in a slightly different way. Individuation is a funny way to live life. No one can tell you about it. You must discover it for yourself. It calls for an extreme sense of dedication and perseverance, and a dashing flair of humor. Always, the others, the analysts, the friends, are the heroes. Individuation is made up of free souls escaping from ordinary social conventions and rising above mediocrity. What you gain from individuation is good and is never lost. It stays a part of you and becomes part of your character. Don't overthink it. Have faith, and the magic of individuation will be present. Now I'm going to give you just a quick, for those of you that are not familiar with triathlon, as I said, it starts way before the crack of dawn. And for Ironman, as an example, you have to get up at least by 4 o'clock. And that's because you have to have your first meal of the day so that the calories are in your system and more or less digested by the time you get to the event, so that you can take in more calories. So it's the very crack of dawn. This is a transition area where you transition from the swim to the bike and then from the bike to the run. Everybody's allotted a particular slot. This is a image of the swim finish. And you might imagine, for those of you that wear glasses, even without glasses, sighting between those buoys with 2,000 people, your so-called closest friends swimming over top of you is not easy. This is the bike out. Somebody looking a little too intense there. That particular event was, I'm heading out for, this is a half Ironman, so I'm heading out for 56 miles of biking the hills of Southwest Michigan. The longer distance triathlons always include an athletes meeting in which they go over the specifics. They go over the specifics of the course, any nuances or idiosyncrasies. And so it's a way of getting, and they're mandatory. So it's a way of getting all the last bit of information, and I always try to include my kids when I could. Talked about the discipline for training, the discipline for individuation. For Ironman, my first Ironman was 468 hours of training. Not that I was counting. 180 miles of swimming, 4,000 miles cycling. My coach liked cycling. And 1,053 miles of running. Now, a couple of nights before I was to leave for my first full Ironman, I had the dream of the Eros trophy and the words of Ironman. In this dream, I was in a large room in part of an award ceremony, I was working behind the scenes and helping to make things go smoothly. Then suddenly my name was called. I remember sweeping the floors and helping set up chairs, and then my name was called. I was handed a large trophy that was Eros, depicted as a winged-footed athlete. The trophy said, "The world of Ironman," and had various philosophical phrases engraved on it. I started crying when I received the trophy. Having the dream, well, I'll show you. This was the first image I saw when I entered the hotel. And having the dream gave me the energy to put my bike in the car and put everything and to get to the event. Now, here's the swim for Ironman Wisconsin. It was it's difficult. I'll show you another picture in a moment. It's difficult to characterize. The wind was howling. It was a very unusual day for Wisconsin. The wind was howling. It was raining, and it was not supposed to get much above 40 degrees. Here's a little better image of just before the swim start. And a record number of athletes, I think it was 39, record number for Ironman, did not finish the swim. It was, even though it's an inland lake, the waters were churned up and the rain and the wind made it an especially difficult swim. But I got through the swim and was consistent with my expectations and my training time. And one thing I should point out here is that with Ironman, unlike some other events I've done, they have volunteers for the volunteers. I mean, they have more volunteers than, it's just absolutely incredible. And here's a woman helping me to get my bike and to get started off on the bike. The bike was, like the swim, was incredibly harrowing. We're third week in September, and with the wind and the rain, the wind is blowing the leaves off of the trees. The rain is, of course, making them wet. And the combination was making the conditions especially slippery. And I saw more than a few bike accidents. And in fact, at one, over the train tracks, I actually stopped and helped to call for the ambulance. So it was especially difficult. Nonetheless, I got through 112 miles and go into the changing room to get ready for the run. And I saw many individuals who were doubled over, vomiting, and it started getting to me. I'm like, oh, you know, maybe this is as hard as it seems. And just then, a volunteer came over and looked at me, and he said, "Stop looking at them." I looked at him, and he said, "Stop looking at them." And I looked at him again, and he had a Ironman finisher shirt on, and he said, "That's not going to help you. You're strong. You're going to do this." And my fingers were not working. It was so cold. My fingers were not working, and part of that was that I had gripped my handlebars so tight for the bike ride that they were just sore. They were not working. And so he literally dressed me and gave me a hug, told me, It's magical. So this is at the beginning of the run. Notice that I have calories in both hands. I need to also mention that I was, and for those of you that don't know Madison, Wisconsin, there are very few flat areas. It is one of the more difficult Ironman courses because of the hills, both in terms of the run, but particularly in terms of the bike in the outlying areas. Really, really significant hills. And I was climbing up one of the hills, doing my best to pedal, pedal, pedal. The wind is howling. In fact, it's the only triathlon that I've done where I saw athletes walking their bikes on the downhill because it was so treacherous. So I'm halfway up this hill. I'm pedaling, pedaling, pedaling. And I hear this person yelling my name. And again, I'm wondering, am I low on calories here? What is happening? I look over to my right, and Greg is there, unannounced, didn't tell me he was going to come. Encouraging, supporting. And again, I have to just emphasize, this is 141 miles of course. And he found me. He knew right where to find me. He found me, and he was to find me several more times on the run. Incredible. Ironman allows for what they call special needs transition bags at the halfway point on the bike and the halfway point on the run. So for example, you can put extra calories in there, you can put extra inner tubes, you can put, in this instance, a dry jacket, an extra set of shoes, whatever you need to finish each of the different disciplines. And I was very thankful that I had packed an extra jacket. It only stayed dry for a few minutes, but even that dryness for a few minutes. And I also have to say that unbeknownst to me, my family packed a picture and a picture frame that you could record. That was enough to keep me going into the second half of the marathon. And shortly after this point, it got dark. And on the marathon, with Ironman, they tend to have a lot of out and backs because they want to keep an eye on the athletes. And at the end of these out and backs, there's always a timing mat. Somebody's trying to cheat the course or what have you. But they tend to be very dark and can be very lonely places without spectators and so forth. At one of those points, again, I heard my name being called, but this time it was through a bullhorn. Somehow Greg had gotten a bullhorn and told the crowd, "This is Warren Sibilla. He's from South Bend." Again, magic around every corner. So was getting through the marathon, and sure enough, get to the finish line. 13 hours and 36 minutes. The Ironman allots 17 hours. It starts at, the gun goes off at 7 a.m. and it goes until midnight. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with Ironman, I will say, if you ever have an opportunity to attend an Ironman, it's free of charge. I would encourage you to spend some time at the finish line, particularly in the later evening, because it will change your life. It will, I can make that guarantee. It will absolutely change your life to see what people do to get across the finish line, to see, to feel that energy. It will change your life. Of course, Jung says the decisive question is, are you related to something infinite? And self-knowledge is the heart and essence of this process. The archetype represents the authentic element of spirit, which is not to be identified with the human intellect, since it is the latter's spiritus rector. The authentic element of spirit, which is not intellect. The symbols of the self arise in the depths of the body, and they express its materiality every bit as much as the structure of perceiving consciousness. The uniqueness of the psyche can never enter wholly into reality. It can only be realized approximately, though it still remains the absolute basis of all consciousness. Now, as I said, it was the third week in September, still had a few more months in the year. I was in good training shape. And so I convinced Greg, my coach, that I could do one more event. And I saw that there was an ultra marathon, never done an ultra marathon, which was an athlete can choose either 50 miles or 50K. And this one is in Chicago, which they hold in late fall and early spring each year. And I decided, well, it's my first ultra, I'll choose the 50K. I'll be conservative. And sure enough, the night before the ultra, I had this dream. I was in a park and was watching a couple play with the dog. They were tossing a frisbee back and forth, and the dog was catching it and bringing it back. Everyone was smiling, and the feeling was one of just pure play and joy. Okay, now I had the dream. I wrote it down, woke up, wrote it down, looked out the window, and it was just pouring rain and winds more than 40 miles an hour. Looked at the lake, and the lake was, the waves were crashing over the break wall. And I thought, oh, got to be kidding me. And the wind, I said, was more than 40 miles an hour, was almost entirely out of the north. So, and the ultra was 3 out and back laps. And I get to the third out and back, which is further than I had ever run. And I looked over my shoulder and I saw a young couple playing Frisbee with a dog, the same couple, the same dog. And I got that whole sense of magic all over again. And I instantly remembered Winnicott's quote about playing. On the basis of playing is built the whole of our experiential existence. No longer are we introvert or extrovert. We experience life in an area that is intermediate between the inner reality of the individual and the shared reality of the world that is external to individuals. Now, I need to also mention that at this point, I was finishing up my training at the Institute and was thinking about a thesis topic. My monitoring committee, the certifying committee, was adamant that I write a more, I'll just say, thinking oriented, intellectually oriented, scholarly thesis. And I gave it a few seconds thought and said, I'm not doing that. Well, we really want you to. I'm not doing that. Well, how about the meeting ended with, how about we both sides just kind of think about it and we'll get back together. Fine. When I had this dream and this experience and the playing, I knew I'm not writing. I'm writing what I want to write. I need to write this. I'm not writing something else. And the committee was of the opinion, well, okay, it wouldn't be what we would recommend, but it's your thesis. Please do it as you see fit. And so I began writing after this experience. Now I'd like to circle back to the mission because it remains just foundational to me, for me. And the experience of gratitude. Gratitude, the experiencing of life as a gift. Because I did write the thesis that I wanted to write, and it's the basis of this presentation. The night before the graduation ceremony, I had the dream of the craftsman's workshop. I'm in a large room, high vaulted ceilings with very large wooden beams from side to side. The room seems filled with wonder and creativity, lots of energy. I begin to orient myself to the room and see a craftsman in the corner using his woodworking tools. Then I'm led to the corner of the room where I see a wall that has every Jungian analyst's name engraved, an intricate and wildly ornate calligraphy style engraving of each analyst, such that each fits next to one another in a grand design with no seams. There's an open spot that I'm shown, and then I see that the craftsman is finishing my name. I start crying and cannot stop. After I graduated, again, the feeling of gratitude was just overwhelming. And I thought, well, I'll take a chance. I'll see if I can contact that professor that taught me all of those courses and see if I can sit in on some of the courses. Well, I was able to get in touch with him, and he remembered me and said, Warren, you can sit in. You're always welcome here. I'll tell you the schedule. You're always welcome here. But what I would prefer, he said, I want you to teach the courses. He said that the university won't know. We're out here. We're at the mission. You can do as much or as little. I'm old. I'll take a nap. You can teach. Tell the students. So of course that just was an incredible experience. Now, I'll say this, and we'll take another break. I told the professor, I told Ron, who trained in San Francisco. I told Ron, I said, look, I want to tell you this dream. I'm not sure why, but I want to tell you this dream. I had this dream, and I told him the dream of the craftsman's workshop. We were having a glass of wine at night, starry night, and he said, well, that's an interesting dream. Why don't you come over here with me? And he took me into this room here in the corner of the building that I'm showing. And he said, do you see these beams up here? Do you see this over here? And he said, I know it looks like a classroom now, but originally this was the craftsman's workshop. This is where the craftsmen worked for the whole mission. It's only in the last 20 years or so that they've turned it into a classroom because it's large, but this was the workshop. And of course, then I'm another instance of being completely awed and out of breath. And so with that, I would like us to take another break. And again, please work with your image, your symbol, your dream, your thought, your feeling, whatever it is that you've chosen to make a space for. Make a space for that. And again, to hold it, not in any type of manner of judging or categorizing or even understanding for that matter. But instead see how it communicates, make a opening for how it might be speaking, and maybe just sit with that for a while. I have 1:45 the hour. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Audiatur et altera pars. Let the other side be heard. Let the other be heard. After Ironman, Wisconsin, I went on to do 2 other full Ironmans and similar experiences. Well, I'll just summarize one. This is Ironman, Florida, in Panama City Beach. And the night before this Ironman, an Indian chief and the Indian chief led the way. He danced the entire course in front of me. And I woke up and thought, okay, this is going to be a good day. The swim, you can see up on the upper left, was in the ocean. 2 laps of a rectangular course And on the second lap, the last turn, swimming into the shore, I got stung twice by jellyfish on my cheek, and that hurts. Certainly more than understandable. You have 2,000 athletes and they're churning up the waters and making an assumption the jellyfish are agitated, and I have my wetsuit on, so you know, it's either going to be my feet or my face, and I got 2 stings to my cheek. I looked at my watch and I was right on time for my my expected swim time, so I thought, I'm not going to let this get in my way. Swam into the shore and took off on the bike and the run, and I finished Ironman Florida in 11 hours and 58 minutes, bettering my time by an hour and 40 minutes or so. And just to give you an idea, some of the caliber of athletes, the professional Ironman athletes will swim at a pace, a level that would qualify them for the Olympics. Similarly, they will bike the 112 miles invariably under 4 hours, which would also qualify for the Olympics. And then they run a sub 3-hour marathon. It's just otherworldly. So that, you know, professional would finish at or near 8 hours. So I was elated to be at about 12 hours. That ended up being my best Ironman time. I did another full Ironman. I did an ultra Ironman, 3-day triathlon. And then I had this dream. I was in an indigenous land speaking with the shaman of the people. And among other things, was told that Ironman was my initiation for the new work at hand. That Ironman had taught me dismemberment, the importance of being dismembered, and the need for a daily discipline to the spirit of dismemberment. I awoke out of breath and in awe. This dream had the feel of like something very important is at hand. An intentionality, unmistakable, and a little weary of dismemberment, but wrote the dream down, worked with the dream, and this introduces us into cards 7, 8, and 9 of the Oxfording series. Card 7, Beyond the Ox. 8, what I call at oneness. And 9, return to the source. 7, 8, and 9. And notice here, start with 7. The forest that once was an image of lostness, although liminal space, lostness, confusion. Although the reins were in hand, unsure what direction, north, south, east, west, forward, back. Now there's a place to call home. Notice that the ox now is a faint image of the moon. Now, rather than relating to the ox in terms of the reins, the nose ring, taming it, fighting it, the ox herder is now in rhythm with the moon, the sun, the moon, the cycles of the psyche. No more reins, no more path. Which leads to an experience of the self at oneness, living it, embodying it, breathing it, modeling it. And a return to the source. Now, the forest, the woods, actually more of an experience of symmetry, of beauty, of harmony, of being in relationship to. No more bridges, no more reins, no more nose rings. And in the Zen tradition, these three cards are intended as, you might think of a threefold pamphlet. They're simultaneous. They're not independent. In other words, if you can imagine it, they're meant as a verb and not as a noun. They happen together. Okay. Now I'm going to jump ahead for just a moment and introduce you to my shaman friend from Peru, Don Jose Campos. You see the boats behind us. They call them boats. I call them skiffs. They're just inches from the water. Jung says, the really important psychic facts can neither be measured, weighed, nor seen in a test tube or under a microscope. They are therefore supposedly indeterminable. In other words, they must be left to people who have an inner sense for them, just as colors must be shown to the seeing and not to the blind. I'll take just a moment and read that again. The really important psychic facts can neither be measured, weighed, nor seen in a test tube or under a microscope. They are therefore supposedly indeterminable. In other words, they must be left to people who have an inner sense for them, just as colors must be shown to the seeing and not to the blind, allowing the other side to be heard. Now, I had this dream. And with a wonderful female presence, very comforting and reassuring, she hands me a passport and indicates that I will need this. I try to hand it back to her by saying thanks, but I'm not planning international travel, and someone else may well need this. She handed it back to me and said, "You will be needing this, and I would like for you to look inside." With that, she handed the passport back to me, and I opened it up to find that it told the entire Christmas story from every tradition imaginable: Christian, Buddhist, indigenous, every culture, every religion, every, from all peoples of the world, in symbols and languages of each particular spiritual tradition. I started crying and she began to drift away. I had this passport in hand. It's, well-worn leather on the outside, and as only dreams can do, it has the eternal inside. Every beginning and every celebration of every beginning from every tradition, bar none. So I had my coffee, I wrote the dream down. I thought, well, this is going to take me a lifetime to work with. And then I get to my practice that morning, turn my computer on, and I have an email from Julio, who is a handler for Don Jose, inviting me to a sacred dieta in Peru in 6 or 8 weeks. And I was out of breath. I never asked for an invitation. But how do you say no? And it was just stunned, absolutely stunned, and of course linked it with the dream. And this was my reply, one of my replies to Julio. I'm in the process of obtaining my passport, and so we'll send you the information requested when I have the passport number. I didn't even have a passport. Meanwhile, I'm checking with my bank to transfer the $300 for the deposit. I hope to do this before the week is out. I'm grateful for this opportunity. Look forward to meeting everyone. Please let me know if there's anything else I need to do to secure my spot. I had to get a whole series of vaccinations, get my passport, get everything in order, explain to my loved ones and friends what I was doing. Some understood, some were a little unsure, but I needed to follow the dream and honor the dream of dreams. And to give you an example of my Parsifal nature, it never dawned on me until I was walking around in the Miami airport waiting for the next flight. I don't speak Spanish. I never have spoken Spanish. And there's a lot of people speaking Spanish here. So I'm without a language. That's okay. There's a universal language. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was in Peru for just shy of 14 days. And, by the 12th, 13th day, I figured out enough to order a coffee from the Starbucks in Lima. So I got up my courage and I went to the Starbucks and ordered my coffee. And the young woman said, "Oh, it's okay. I speak English." You did a good job. You did a really good job, but it's okay. I speak English. So here's one of the villages in Peru where we stayed. Give you a sense of Peru. This is one of the views from the shaman's camp. The Amazon River. I'll tell you another story. When we were loading up the boat, and you could only bring in a handful of very specific, because we went from his home and then traveled 3+ hours on dirt, cobblestone, dusty roads like the picture you saw, to a ferry which carried us over to the Amazon River here, loaded up the skiffs and went down. And so you can only take a very limited amount of stuff with you. And for some reason, I had packed the ox herding pictures and have fallen in love with them ever since. But the last thing that was loaded onto the boats, and then you go down the river. We were on the river for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. Then you pull ashore, and it's a 6.5 mile hike into the shaman's compound. And that is, most of it is waist deep water and muck and so forth. So you have to carry everything overhead. And the last thing that was loaded onto the boats was guns. Again, my Parsifal nature. I thought, well, hold on. And I said, well, hold on. Nobody said anything about guns. I'm not a gun person. Who said, what are we doing with guns? And they said, Warren, you're in the Amazon. There are real animals here, real animals. I said, oh, okay, I know, but why guns? We need guns, okay? So we will have guns and you'll see how it works. Okay, well, was leery with guns, but actually by the second or third night, a person would be on watch, walking the perimeter of the compound with the guns. And it actually became very comforting, the rhythm of their walking and timeliness of their rounds. And it became a kind of ritual and something to rely on and know that I was safe. And so here's another image of the trails in the compound. I will say that one of the last nights that I was there, or days, there was a a rainstorm, a howling rainstorm. And it was the most incredible experience because you can hear it and you can look up and kind of see it, but everything stays dry. It's really incredible. And this is the medicine hut. I'm going to go back for just a second since I have time. Here, this is the tambo, what they call a tambo. That's where each of us stayed. And they would bring our meals to us, which consisted essentially of rice. And then a special tea that they made. But it's obviously especially primitive. There you see the skiffs and okay. This is the medicine hut where the ayahuasca ceremonies are performed. And I'm not prepared at this point to talk about the experiences, except for the last ceremony. And in the last ceremony, toward the end, I heard the roar of the jaguar. And I knew that I heard it. And I said something afterward to the shaman, and he politely said, well, you know, again, we're working with no Spanish and broken English and etc. But nonetheless communicating, and he said, well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, you know. And so the next morning, I went out, and this is a picture now that's on my mantle. And I knew I had a pretty good idea of where I heard it. That's when my hearing was still okay. A pretty good idea of where I heard it. And first thing in the morning, I went to that area, and sure enough, found this print. And then went and got Don Jose and asked him, and he said, sure enough, that's the image, that's the print of the jaguar. And again, I'll come back to Jung. The decisive question is, are you related to something infinite? And self-knowledge is the heart and essence of this process. Audiatur et alter pars, letting the other side not only be heard, but let the other side live in you. I will say that I have, since this time, I've gone on and trained several years at several different Zen monasteries, and also have received training from a shaman as a way of carrying all of this forward. And also am now doing, no longer doing the Ironman or the triathlons, but doing obstacle course racing and DecaFit functional fitness events. So all of this brings us then finally to card 10. Hoite, the laughing Buddha, who plays with the kids, who laughs at the leaves falling, who has a beer in the tavern with the folks. re-entering the marketplace, embodying the other that has been heard, bringing it full circle, sharing with others the boons of an experience of the self. And to close, I will offer a koan, a so-called teaching story in Zen. I like the definition. A koan is the profundity of the present moment, becoming the present moment. The profundity of the present moment, becoming the present moment, which emphasizes the verb. So here's the koan. Joshu asked Nansen, "What is the path?" Nansen said, "Everyday life is the path." Joshu asked, "Can it be studied?" Nansen said, "If you try to study, you'll be far away from it." Joshu asked, "Well, if I don't study it, how can I know it is the path?" Nansen said, "The path does not belong to the perception world. Neither does it belong to the non-perception world. Cognition is a delusion, and non-cognition is senseless. If you want to reach the true path beyond doubt, place yourself in the same freedom as sky. You name it neither good nor not good." At these words, Joshu was enlightened. Okay, I thank you very, very much for your patience. It's an odd situation. Typically, I would be seeing your faces and feeling your energies, and we're stuck doing this virtual thing. So I very much appreciate your patience and would welcome any comments, questions, feedback that you might have.
So again, folks, you can use the reaction button, raise your hand, we'll call on you. Or you can type a question into the chat and we can read that question to Warren. Either way.
Georgina, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, yes, good afternoon. Your sharing was absolutely fabulous. And I was leaning in. Half the time I was like, camera turned off, but as your story went, I'm just so thrilled with the nature of the process you had. At first, I thought Ironman is like, okay, you're going to the gym and getting strong or something or other. But as the dreams and as the process unfolded, your sharing is absolutely divine. And I'm thrilled to say I found my book here, Buddhism and Jungian Psychology, and I've got my my ox that I can refer to. So thank you very much. It was just a very enlightening, wonderful honor to be able to join you on your journey, in essence.
Oh, Georgine, I'm so glad you could be here. Thank you. I need to also say to your group, offer a very, very special hello to Jacqueline West. Jacqueline she was kind enough to come to Chicago, and she was on my final exam committee for my thesis, which is the basis of this presentation, and the last exam that I took at the Institute. And I still remember her very warm encouragement. And I'll just tell the group, when I passed, and they told me that I passed, it was one of those out of time moments. And I think it was just a few moments, but I don't know. And Jacqueline said, it's okay. You've passed. This is great. And that was enough to wake up. Yeah. Okay, it did happen. So I wanted to make sure to say a very special thanks to Jacqueline. Thank you, Georgina.
Thank you.
Warren, I was just fascinated with the whole concept of individuation. Your journey was marvelous, but what really struck me, the dreams seemed to so synchronize with your journey. Your unconscious just laid out the whole thing. It was just fascinating to me, because sometimes dreams don't necessarily, if you don't understand them, depict a particular journey you're on, but highlight areas. But every phase of this journey seemed to be laid out in your dreams. I found that really fascinating.
Well, thank you. This is a snapshot. And to offer another compliment to what I presented, you can't mix with the energies of, I like to use the archetype of the other instead of anima, animus, or the self, without getting affected. It's not possible. So to give you an example, after my second Ironman, get a bit full of myself, and I'm out on a long bike ride, way out in rural Indiana. I thought, well, you know what? I'll just go a little bit further. I'll just go a little bit further. Next thing I know, 3 feral dogs are taking me down. Now, for those of you that bike, you know that there are different types of dogs. Some announce the territory and just say, this is my yard. Some just yip yap because there's energy. Some run. The dogs you have to worry about are the silent ones, because they know what they're doing. And there were 3 of them, and they saw me long before I saw them. That's a problem. One grabbed onto my foot on the one side, one on the other. One went in front of the front tire, perpendicular, so I launched. And then sideways, and was just toast on the asphalt. And they were over top of me, continuing the argument. I was not arguing at that point. They had won. And eventually a farmer came out and got them out. And, I was conscious enough to say, here's my wife's name, here's her phone number, call. Well, and then I had, I took the experiences from the mission and recreated what I could at silent contemplative retreats that I lead. And I had a retreat set up for the next weekend. And I thought, oh, okay, here, we'll talk about enantiodromia. We'll talk about that which is high has been knocked low. We'll let the other side be here. We'll talk about inflation and deflation. And so it's not all wine and roses. I mean, you can't mix with the energies of the deeper layers of psyche without being affected. The task is to have, the invitation is to have wonderful people around you that help and support and ground. And so, yes, but there are other dreams that I could, in the end, it's having the patience and the fortitude to see it all through. So thank you very much.
Amy Wong.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm curious how in these different stages of individuation, how you saw it integrate into your life professionally as a teacher, a mentor, a clinician, or personally, you know, as a family man, a father, you know, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. I'm just curious, you know, at these different milestone points. It seems very, very significant. And I just want to thank you for your vulnerability and your sharing as well.
Oh, thank you for coming. And I'll say a couple of things. One, I thought that I could, again, in a way of gratitude and giving back, and I thought that I could teach at a graduate school. I went to a professional graduate school and obviously thought the world of my training, so I thought I could give back and do some of that, and I did in Chicago. But after just a handful of years, realized that this is not the kind of learning that I don't want to participate in this. It was very rote. They were worshiping the APA gods and sold their soul completely. They had what I called the APA visit psychosis, which starts 2 years ahead of a site visit. They do practice visits, and it's a crazy, it is absolute psychosis. I couldn't participate anymore. I tried, I can't do it. My heart's not in this, and I don't want to do this kind of teaching. I've always been oriented to the dream. As I say in the book, my last name, Sibilla, comes from Sibyl, and you might know that the Sibyls were, the women who interpreted dreams, the seers, and so forth. And Michelangelo painted them in opposite corners in the Sistine Chapel. So at some point they had a place in the church. And my mom reminded me that I would always ask my siblings for their dreams at the breakfast table. So, I've always been oriented to the dream. I'll just give another quick example. We at the Chicago Institute were in need of a director of training, and that's a big undertaking. And I have a lot to do, but I had a dream where I was in a room and there was a large antique chest of drawers, very old antique, and they're all unique drawers. And the two previous directors of training were there. And they opened up one of the drawers and handed me the mannequin that Jung had carved and put up in his attic that he talks about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And they said, here, you'll be needing this. So I woke up and said, oh, I need to tell them that I'm interested in the director of training position. I wouldn't have signed up for it otherwise, but so, okay, well, I need to carry number 2 personality forward, and here's an opportunity. And so I have attempted, there's always a fair amount of administration and so forth that goes on. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to the Lord what is the Lord. So, but I've tried to maintain number 2 personality perspective and bring that energy into the training of candidates. So there's 2 examples. Thank you.
Warren, I wanted to tell you that that there are comments in the chat. They're saying from Linda Dodds, a wonderful presentation, loved your dreams and how listening to your anima led you to individuation and gave you courage and freedom. And then Jane Penrod says, thank you very much for this presentation. I deeply appreciate the struggles and the intimate moments.
I should thank you. I should mention too to everyone, if you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to, and it doesn't get heard or comes up later or what have you, you're welcome to email me if you wish. And maybe I'll type my email address in the chat. Is that?
That would be great. Yeah.
I have a question.
Please.
Is it okay?
Who is this?
This is Maria Lokes. Is it okay?
Okay, yes. Hi, Maria.
Hi. So my question is concerning interpreting one's own dreams. I recently saw the movie, The Tragedy of Macbeth, and it struck me in the beginning of the movie when he's listening to the witches tell him that he will be king as long as Birnam Wood does not move. And those witches seemed very much to me like dream images. And Macbeth interprets the witches as believing that he will be king, and because Birnam Wood cannot move. And he's obviously later in the tragedy of Macbeth, the Birnam Wood does move. And it started me thinking about how one interprets one's own dreams. And I would love if you could speak to that a little bit.
I think that's very important. I will just say, since graduate school, there are very few months where I've not had some type of supervision. And it's hard to imagine practicing without that, because for me, it is a very solid mooring. And I have an analyst now. We meet a couple times a month. We call it peer supervision, but it is it's a check and a balance. And invariably, I'll say, well, I have this dream, and here's what I think it means, and here's where it links, and here's where, and invariably, the other analysts will say, well, yeah, okay, but what about? And then it turns it another 180 degrees, right? So I don't, what I tell people, when you wake up from the dream, you're in the dream. You're in the dream. It's not you're in the dream. And you're in the dream for, depending on the energy of the dream, you're in the dream for days. So if you want to begin to look at your own dreams, first of all, wake up with the dream. Just hold the dream. Maybe you can write it down on a piece of paper. I'm old school, or put it in your phone, or put it in your pocket, or just befriend it. No interpretation, no categorization. And if you want to get to a point where you maybe move to some type of understanding of it, you have to give it at least a couple of weeks, because there's no figure ground. You're still in it, unless you tell it to another person who then serves as that. But still, you're very much in it, and just respecting that you're in that energy. So and like my dear late friend Robert Johnson said, there is no interpreting a dream. There's living into it. There's embodying it. But the older I get, the more hesitant I am about, interpreting per se, as if that is meant, if by that it is meant a categorization. Because I can, and I'm sure this is no different than each of you, I continue to have dreams of images, a whole series of dreams of images that pull from decades ago. All of a sudden, they're back. And remember that the psyche includes a timelessness. There's no statute of limitations. There's no statute of limitations on any dream, which is wonderful to remind ourselves, for good or for bad. And if it was a harrowing dream or exciting dream, there's no statute of limitations. So it's working with them, but also recognizing that you're very much in it. And you know, if it's at all possible, and you have very trusted friends or colleagues, or you know, having somebody to bounce it off.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions from anyone?
Sylvia Stenitzer. I have a question.
Please.
All right, Sylvia.
Yes, well, first of all, like, I want to, of course, thank you, Dr. Sibilla. So inspiring for the rest of my life. I'm not a Jungian trained person. I'm in Jungian analysis, but I'm not trained. But I come from the part of the world where Jung comes from. I'm from Austria. And I wanted to ask you, I didn't understand, it went too fast by me. When you mentioned the number, you know, you said the music is the skin on the number, which that I can relate with mathematics and music, but I didn't understand. Could you talk more about what you were referring, what the number
Yes.
means, please?
Well, first of all, yes, I can. First of all, I'll remind us of that experience Jung had at the end of his life, where he was still seeing a few patients, and a woman came to him and she said, "Herr Doctor, I can't tell you my dream." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, I could tell you my dream, but that wouldn't, I really can't, it's too much. I can't tell you my dream because it's really not a word's dream." And he said, "Okay, well, what do you propose?" And she said, "Over there, your piano. I can play it for you." And so she played it, and he was in tears, and, you know, saying to himself, all these years, and I'm telling people to put it into words. Why didn't I include music? Like, that was beautiful. I know exactly what, and it was what was right for her, and we're both in tears, and the meaning is present, and the energy is. If she put it into words, we would have missed more than half of it. So he says, I believe it's in volume 8, he says, number is the first patterning that the unconscious takes that we can perceive.
I have to write this down.
And for me, then, one step or even a half a step further from that is music puts skin or embodies those, the number. And that's why, for instance, you know, certain institutions, certain organizations, churches, no music, no, because we know what music gets. And it gets us too close to the unconscious. So no music, or the music is especially rote or bland or what have you. Yeah, of course, because it gets you, that the doors and the windows start opening into the unconscious. And that is, for some groups, too threatening. So no music.
This kind of reminds me of something I just saw. There, probably many of us know that there's these bone whistles that were dug up that are about 50 in Europe, that are about 50,000 years old, and they're perfect intervals.
Wow.
So 50,000 years ago, our ancestors were doing that with bone, but of course, before they did that with bone, they were doing that with wood and other things. So it could be that even 100,000 years ago, our ancestors were figuring out these mathematical intervals, like the first, the fourth, the fifth, the octave, and putting them into play, to play with them.
Right.
So, yeah, there you go. The unconscious recognizes number
Right.
Yeah.
first.
Also, for everyone, I saw a wonderful movie on Netflix called Words and Pictures, because art is also another portal into the unconscious. It's a story of a professor who was brilliant, and then a woman comes who was a brilliant artist. And I won't tell you anything more about that, but he thought words conveyed more meaning than art, and she thought the other way around. And the school had a contest. It's really, it's terrific. So yeah, art is another portal into the unconscious. Won't you agree with that, Warren? Like, just like music?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes, for many, many, many years in my consulting room, I had a half partition. So 2/3 the room was my talking space, so to speak. And 1/3 of the room was the art area. And I had an old butcher block table and my sand tray and figures and crayons and paints and pencils and etc. And certainly with the kids that I saw, they would begin over there and maybe not have any time in the talking area. It's up to them. But sometimes, of course, with the adults, and I would say, well, maybe you could draw that better than you can tell me. Maybe words don't, or maybe you want to put something in sand or what have you. And so would have that complementary space. Absolutely, yes.
Well, in your presentation today, Robert, Warren, I'm following up on Robert's comment. Warren, today showing the images from the Buddhists, the possession of those are artistic images transmitting knowledge in that way.
Right, yes.
Well, do we have anyone else that would like to say anything or ask any questions? Well, before you end the call, I wanted to let everyone know again who has registered for CEUs that next week you'll get an email with an evaluation form. And then for everyone on this Zoom presentation and those who weren't able to be here, by the next weekend, you'll receive an email with a link to a video recording of this wonderful presentation. And personally, Warren, I want to say thank you very much for sharing yourself, your story, your time, and your knowledge.
Thank you for having me.
Lisa, I saw Shanti had her hand raised. I asked if there were
Am
other.
I connected now?
Excuse me?
I said,
Do you hear me?
Shanti had her hand raised.
Yes,
Oh, okay, Shanti.
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you. I want to connect with what the lady said before already, the relationship to numbers. And now in Mayan culture, the numbers were gods. And here what I felt during your speech, Warren, is this passion to heighten the numbers, a passion to connect your physical effort with numbers, 143. My husband is a scientist. For him, truth is only what can be numbered. I have a totally different experience. For me, numbers get me away from the inner truth. And I would love if you, Warren, could tell a bit more your relationship to, in the Ironman, to numbers. Why is that so passionate a relationship?
Well, it's a very important question. I would say, I'll use our training institute as an example. If we lean too much on the side of number, as you said, your husband understands, we become rigid about number of hours this, number of hours that, then we lose something. When we lean on the side of numbers as you're experiencing them, as a container for the sacred, for instance, 140.6 miles, then we leave room for the sacred. You know, how do you, people will ask, how do you possibly complete that many miles? Well, if you look at it solely from the perspective of number, as you say your husband is, of course it's absurd. Who would sign up for that? But if you make room for the sacred, then it's not the body that completes the Ironman. It's the spirit. You have to get yourself out of the way. If you make, let the other side be heard. How do you do that? Well, for some, it's for me, I'll say, the endurance makes room for the sacred. So the spirit, and I've given examples of how I use the word magic, and that's the word that I like to use. I've given examples of experiencing the magic, as Jung says, the unconscious is everywhere present, and how that magic gets me to the finish line, not my body. Of course it's a body. As Jung says when he talks about his comments on the East, well, of course there's an observing ego. There's an ego that takes it in, but it's not the body per se that gets to the finish line. It's the body that has made room for the spirit. And the spirit is then incarnated.
Thank you.
Thank
Beside that, I love your tears. They're wonderful. Thank you.
I've decided that I'm going to present this material in the manner in which it was experienced, because otherwise I'm not satisfied. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, I just had a comment. This is Anita LaCour. I was just thinking how the physical challenge is so much of the shamanic ritual as well. That through pushing your body to its extreme limits, something happens spiritually to open you to other dimensions. And I was thinking, of course, Native American traditions with their dancing, where it's like this repeated grueling experience, which again is the whole intent, is to take you into another level of consciousness. So it makes a lot of sense that the Ironman interfaces with this kind of shamanic journey that you've been on.
Yes, thank you. There is, in fact, you remind me, when I was doing Ironman, there were several professionals who had just recently retired and had incorporated a shaman and shamanic practices in the training. They were coaching then other athletes and were including shamanic practices and so forth in the athletic training. I thought, well, that's really consistent with my experiences. So just to give you an example, yes, indeed, absolutely.
Well, Warren, just a beautiful job, a beautiful, wonderfully woven presentation, very inspiring, very interesting. I've seen the ox herding pictures presented numbers of times. And this was a very unique and wonderful version of that. So I want to thank you very much for your thoughtful and artful way of weaving this all together. We appreciate you coming and doing this with us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and attention, and hopefully I can connect with your group again.
We hope we'll see you again. And
Okay.
everyone, I really appreciate you all coming today. And of course, I appreciate you, Lisa Pounders, for your contributions and your technical savvy. Next month, we have Frances Hatfield, one of our local analysts, and she'll be doing Oedipus Revisited, the hero as initiate. So please join us. That's actually March 11th. Oh no, March 12th. We really hoped to have had that in person, but even the venue that we've been using all these years, they're not ready. So we're not going to do in person this year, and we really, really are hoping to have in-person events again in the fall. So thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend, and see you next time.
Thank you.